My boyfriend spent his entire life inventing a time machine. He wanted to travel back to win back his first love. I secretly followed him through time. Then I saw him, whom I had painstakingly taught how to love someone, holding his first love's hand and saying tenderly, "I didn't know how to love before and hurt your heart, but now I've learned." The day after returning from the past, I met Julian Leong at Sophie Xia's birthday party. He appeared in the private room holding a handmade cake and a carefully chosen gift. In the soft glow of candlelight, his gaze was focused and full of deep affection. My atmosphere instantly peaked, with everyone gathered around waiting for Sophie to make a wish and blow out the candles. Then they started teasing them to kiss. I stood quietly at the very edge of the crowd, watching Sophie, holding roses, playfully rise on her toes to kiss Julian on the cheek. My roommate beside me introduced, "That's Sophie Xia's boyfriend. Isn't he super handsome? Not only that, but he's also incredibly considerate, gentle, attentive, and always maintains a respectful distance from women. Simply perfect." In silence, I watched Julian Leong, eyes smiling, gently tuck a stray strand of hair behind Sophie Xia's ear. After withdrawing my gaze, I softly replied to my friend, "Indeed mature and reliable, very good at taking care of others." After all, that's the result of 5 years of my time and effort, teaching him bit by bit. The Julian Leong of the beginning was nothing like this. He was ill-tempered, impatient, impulsive, quick to anger. 暴躁又傲慢. Their relationship, which lasted less than 2 years with Sophie Xia, ended with her venting all her frustrations and falling for his friend. Julian Leong couldn't accept it, so he spent years developing a time machine, learned everything I taught him about loving someone, and without hesitation left me to travel back to his sophomore year when he first got together with Sophie Xia, even though the very next day would have been our 5th anniversary. But he couldn't wait. Now, we've become complete strangers. The birthday party was for Sophie Xia, so naturally the conversation revolved around her and Julian Leong. Someone asked her how she managed to find such a perfect boyfriend. Another inquired if Julian had any equally handsome friends. One person even joked, "Half, seriously, ever heard the saying, one plants the tree, another enjoys the shade? Julian is so attentive, surely an ex-girlfriend taught him that." Hearing this, Julian didn't take offense. He simply smiled faintly, then took Sophie's hand, as if making a vow or a promise. "There are no exes. Sophie is my first love, and she is the only one I've ever loved." Of course, he had no exes, because I didn't get together with Julian until the 2nd year after their breakup. I wasn't the planter. I was the one enjoying the shade. But that didn't stop him from using every way I taught him to love me and applying it all to Sophie. The private room was dimly lit and crowded, so from start to finish, he never noticed me standing in the corner. It wasn't until after cutting the cake, as Sophie handed out slices and introduced him to her friends, that Julian Leong stood before me, our eyes meeting. I couldn't quite describe the look on his face the moment he saw me. His smile froze at the corners of his lips, a flicker of inexplicable panic flashing in his eyes, but he quickly composed himself. Then, as Sophie Xia introduced me as Ava Yu, my classmate, he stared at me, utterly lost in thought. I maintained a perfectly measured, faint smile, watching as Sophie tugged at his sleeve and frowned, asking, "What's wrong? Do you two know each other?" Only then did Julian snap back to reality. Handing me the cake, he cut into small portions and saying coldly and distantly, "No, we don't." Holding the cake, I sat on the single sofa, gazing at Julian, who had already returned to the center of the crowd. Under the shimmering, shifting lights, he stood tall and lean, his features strikingly intense. Truly, his looks were in a league of their own, especially his eyes, deep as ink, appearing both innocent and deeply affectionate whenever he focused intently on someone. So, during the 5 years we were together, no matter how angry or upset I was, just seeing his face, just him quietly looking at me and softly calling out, "Ava," I would immediately surrender and forgive him effortlessly. The small cake in my hand emitted a faint orange blossom scent. My roommate, biting her spoon, mumbled, "Ava, you have to try this. It's seriously super delicious." He's so thoughtful. Great. Now, I have to add another criterion for my future boyfriend. I curved my lips into a slight smile and took a small bite. It was a very familiar taste. It was something I taught Julian Leong to make. I spent half a month patiently guiding him through each step, carefully teaching him through repeated attempts. Back then, he looked at me earnestly and said, "Ava, once I learn how, I'll make a cake for you with my own hands every birthday." He eventually learned, but he never made one for me. In fact, in the trajectory of our previous life's fate, my first encounter with Julian Leong wasn't at this birthday party, because I wasn't actually very familiar with Sophie Xia. She had invited the whole class to her birthday party, and I hadn't planned on going. I was dragged along by my roommate just to make up numbers. So in my previous life, I only stayed for a while, gave my gift and wishes, then left early. Thus, I also missed Julian Leong, who arrived fashionably late. I only heard about him from my roommates when we returned to the dorm that night. "Ava, you left too early. You missed Sophie Xia's boyfriend. He's an absolute top tier hottie." Too bad. He seemed cold and aloof, looking impatient the whole party. Putting their personalities aside, they're quite a visually matched pair. I'm not a very curious person. I've never been interested in other people's business, let alone another girl's boyfriend. So after hearing that, I just smiled indifferently and didn't pay it any more attention, nor did I ask for his name. It wasn't until later, not long after Julian and I got together, that I accidentally saw a photo in his study and realized he was that handsome guy I never got to see back then, Sophie Xia's boyfriend. But I didn't mind. After all, everyone has a past. But now, we've returned to the past. Unlike the previous life, this time almost everyone was praising Julian Leong. Perhaps because the atmosphere around them was too jubilant, it made my corner seem somewhat lonely. With an indescribable emotion, I unconsciously drank several more glasses of fruit wine. In my tipsy days, I couldn't tell whether the time travel was real or not. So I got up and went to the outdoor balcony to clear my head with the breeze for a long time. When I returned sober, the crowd had already dispersed. As my fingers touched the half-open private room door, I saw Julian Leong kneeling before a drunken Sophie Xia on the sofa, holding her hand and saying tenderly, "I didn't know how to love before and hurt your heart, but now I've learned." I had to admit that Julian, with his extraordinary academic talent, could master anything he set his mind to learning. So after that birthday party, I began frequently hearing about all the things Julian did for Sophie, like bringing her a single rose every time he visited, peeling shrimp and removing fish bones for her at dinners, or handcrafting gifts to create little romantic gestures. Oh, he occasionally still comes to accompany Sophie Xia to class. And the only interaction between us since returning from the time travel was at Sophie Xia's birthday party. Then there's today. My roommate, who's in the same guitar club as Sophie Xia, begged me to join their hiking trip to take photos for her. "Ava, please. I absolutely love your composition, lighting, and color style. I'll treat you to a feast when we get back." I gave in after her persistent pleading, but when I arrived at the meeting point with my camera, I spotted Julian Leong, who had come along with Sophie Xia, dressed in a black and white tracksuit. He stood slightly bowed in the crowd, listening attentively to what Sophie Xia was saying. Perhaps he sensed my gaze lingering on him, but I calmly averted my eyes just before he turned to look my way. My roommate enthusiastically introduced my photography skills to her friends. Ava Yu, a self-taught photography master. Her use of light and composition is top tier. Amused, I smiled politely at the laughing students and said, "Just an amateur, happy to help take photos if anyone needs." So throughout the rest of the trip, people kept trading snacks for my help taking photos, until Sophie Xia pulled Julian Leong over. Her eyes curved into smiling crescents as she said, "Ava Yu, could you take one for us too?" Holding the camera, I smiled and nodded, finding a good angle to frame them through the lens. But before I could press the shutter, I heard my roommate standing nearby loudly ask, "Julian, Why aren't you smiling? Look over at AVU. Smile. I waited silently for the moment Julian forced out a stiff smile and quickly snapped a few shots. Later, on the bus ride back, we looked through the photos together. After accepting everyone's polite and cheerful compliments, we finally came to the ones my roommate had taken of me. They were actually pretty good, except in one of them. The focus had accidentally landed on a passerby who walked behind me and unintentionally photobombed the shot. It was a guy in a black hoodie and gray pants, his hood pulled low over his layered bangs. Amid the cheerful noise, someone suddenly pointed at the photo and blurted out, "There's a saying online, isn't there? You two were strangers, yet captured in the same frame. Could it be that in another timeline, you truly knew each other?" The smile on my face finally faded completely after hearing his words. He wasn't wrong. That boy and I, we really did know each other in our past life. His name was Daniel Chun, my first love. Truth be told, it had been so long since I last saw him, ever since he passed away on our second anniversary. It's just that my life seemed to have frozen on the day he died, stuck in place, suspended mid-air. Now that time has rewound. We haven't even met yet. My wandering thoughts were jerked back by a sudden break. The camera slipped from my hand due to inertia, only to be swiftly caught by Julian Leong sitting diagonally ahead. After calming my nerves from the intense tension, I was about to ask for a back when I noticed him frowning intently at that photo. The next second, my roommate tilted her head for a look, and her surprised voice rang out abruptly. "Julian, he looks a lot like you." I don't know what Julian Leong thought in that moment. His fingers suddenly tightened, but he truly was a substitute. The idea of us being together actually came from him. Yet I knew better than anyone that Julian wasn't Daniel Chun. No matter how similar, he could never be. So at first, being with him came with a sense of guilt and apology, since my only intention was to see his face. It wasn't until I accidentally learned that Sophie Xia was his first love and heard his drunken words, "Wait until I learn how to love someone, then I'll come find you," that I finally understood what he meant when he told me, "I don't know how to love. Will you teach me how to love you?" He didn't love me. We were each getting what we needed. So I began to accept him as a substitute without remorse. I started teaching him the ways Daniel had loved me. I finally understood why, in most fantasy dramas, a mere illusion of a lost lover can trap the protagonist. Even knowing it's not the real one, they're willing to drown in the delusion. And I was Qingxingde aware that this was undoubtedly like drinking poison to quench thirst, a temporary relief with dire consequences. But fate made me see the scattered documents in a study just when I wanted to give up most, about wormholes, black holes, the speed of light, about the clock paradox, time reversal, and time travelers, and a line that seemed casually jotted down. A traveler can only travel back into their own past body. In that heartbeat, racing moment, an incredible guess inexplicably surfaced in my mind. Truthfully, after being with Julian Leong, what struck me most wasn't his inability to love, but his intelligence, an extreme kind of brilliance. Walls covered in certificates, trophies, and the title of physics prodigy all showcased his glorious and smooth journey, yet also gave him a touch of barely restrained arrogance. He didn't know how to humble himself to love someone in a relationship until he broke up with Sophie Xia. That was probably the only unsolvable problem he ever faced. So he obsessively sought every possible method to find an answer, then go back and conquer it. To be honest, I don't know whether Julian Liang's obsession is Sophie Xia, the one he could never have, or the one and only failure in his life's journey. I don't know if he truly intends to reverse time and travel back, as I suspect, nor do I know if he can succeed. But what if? So I pretended to know nothing and stayed with him, year after year, longer than he had been with Sophie Xia, and longer than I had been with Daniel Chun, until the day before our 5th anniversary. I called him, "Julian, let's talk when you get back. I want to break up." Surprisingly, he fell silent on the other end of the line for a long time, then softly said, "Ava, I might not be able to celebrate our 5th anniversary with you. I'm sorry." Frowning, I was about to say it didn't matter when the call was abruptly ended. Holding my phone, I stood there for a few seconds before suddenly realizing what he meant. Almost without hesitation, I rushed to his now empty laboratory, and just like that, we went from being a couple to strangers. He handed in a perfect answer, becoming the model boyfriend in everyone's eyes. I also had the chance to save Daniel Chen, to alter his inevitable fate. Just as I cared little about Julian Liang and Sophie Xia's past, he showed no interest in who I had been with. So I thought about Daniel Chen being my first love. Julian Liang would never know. The camera was finally handed back to me. Julian said nothing, only tilting his head to gaze silently out the window. I had no mind for anything else. My eyes fixed on the photo, my thoughts wholly consumed by Daniel Chen, when suddenly one thing became clear. No matter how much I wished to preserve the course of my past life, waiting for that first encounter with him on the basketball court, the present trajectory had already shifted due to one subtle change after another. Like this photo where he accidentally appeared. Like in the next day's lecture, when he sat down beside me. I'd once heard that music and scents are vessels of memory. It's true, because the moment Daniel Chen took his seat, the familiar hint of citrus scent struck my heart faster than any reaction I could muster. It tugged at threads of lingering, intricate pain. I sat rigidly at the desk, letting memories surge like tidal waves, interwoven romantic scenes, vivid fragments of our time together, until the final second before the car accident, when he turned the steering wheel toward me, then died before my eyes. Just when I loved him most, my thoughts were interrupted by the teacher's question. She called my name, and in the dead silence of the classroom, I rose slowly, unable to utter a single word in response, because I hadn't been listening at all. I remembered this teacher, notorious in the department for asking others to help answer when someone couldn't respond. So after I stayed silent for half a minute, she glanced over the sea of bowed heads and asked leisurely, "Is there anyone willing to help answer?" I hadn't fully shaken off the sad memories yet, and actually thought it would be fine if no one stood up. If I kept standing, I could keep glimpsing Daniel Chen beside me when I looked down. Without him noticing, his slender fingers rested on a black pen as he casually flipped through the book, then suddenly stood up and declared clearly, "I will." In my astonishment, my lowered head gradually tilted sideways and upward as he rose. But what surprised me even more was the teacher adjusting his glasses and asking, "Is the young man at the back also here to help answer the question?" Daniel Chen and I turned around almost simultaneously to see Julian Liang, who had accompanied Sophie Xia to class, standing up 2 rows behind us. For a moment, countless gazes fell upon him. He didn't look at me, only calmly gazing forward as he said, "No, I'm going to the restroom." He was heading to the restroom, so it was Daniel Chen who had come to my rescue. After sitting down, I was about to turn and thank him when he suddenly leaned over and whispered softly to me, "Classmate, your eyes are so red. Are you about to cry? It's just a question you couldn't answer. Don't cry." Faced with his sudden closeness, I was stunned for a moment before slowly processing it. But I didn't tell him that my sore, reddened eyes weren't because I couldn't answer the question. Later, using gratitude as an excuse, I said I'd treat him to a meal. After class, I took him to a nearby beef noodle soup shop and effortlessly told the owner, 2 bowls of beef noodle soup, no scallions in either. Turning around, I saw Daniel Chen looking at me with a faint smile as he asked, "How did you know I don't like scallions either?" I froze for a moment, unsure how to explain, when I heard him add, "Though I don't know who you were thinking of when you ordered." Instinctively stating that preference, I still need to introduce myself. As he spoke, he extended his right hand toward me, looking at me earnestly as he said, "Hello, Ava Yu. I'm Daniel Chen, a first-year graduate student in the Department of Medicine at Arden University." I knew he was from Arden University next door, and that he was actually filling in for a friend's class. And this beef noodle soup shop, nestled between our 2 universities, was the one we frequented most often in our past life together. Though it's been a long time, I still vividly remember the last time I came here. It was the second week after Daniel Chin had left. In psychology, there's a term called the emotional isolation defense mechanism, which activates to prevent the brain from collapsing when faced with extreme grief and pain. So initially, when confronted with Daniel Chen's death, with the fact that I would never see him again or hear his voice, I felt numb and calm, devoid of any emotion. Staring at the grayscale photo on the tombstone, I didn't shed a single tear, only lying awake in the dead of each night, vividly recalling every past moment, until one ordinary evening, I came to this noodle shop and habitually ordered 2 bowls of beef noodle soup without scallions. Then, after the noodles were served, gazing at the empty seat across from me, tears unexpectedly began to fall. The emotions that had been sealed away all along seemed to suddenly tear open, followed by pain spreading from my heart throughout my entire body, and tears that just wouldn't stop. In the end, when I forced myself to finish the entire bowl of noodles, I threw it all up from overwhelming sorrow. Since then, I never returned to this noodle shop. Fortunately, now that I've returned to the very beginning, the car accident hasn't happened yet, Daniel Chin hasn't died, and everything can still be set right. I looked at the hand extended before me, gently held it, and earnestly explained to him, I wasn't thinking of anyone. It's just my preference. I misspoke and said 2 bowls. He tilted his head and laughed. What a coincidence then. From now on, it'll always be 2 bowls. In the end, Daniel Chin paid the bill. Under my surprised gaze, he smiled and handed me his phone. In public, having a girl pay would make me seem rather ungentlemanly. How about this? Add me on WeChat, and you can transfer the money to me later. I added him and transferred the money, but he refunded it, saying, it's our first meal together. There's no reason to let a girl pay. How about you do me a favor instead? They had a free clinic event and asked me to help take photos. A week later, I followed him to a nearby community with my camera, capturing scenes of their medical consultations. In the photo, Daniel Chin was patiently answering residents' questions, measuring blood pressure and sugar for the elderly, and chatting with children. The midday sunlight fell on him in his white coat, as if casting a soft glow around him, both dazzling and gentle. If Julian Leong was like an unattainable flower on a high peak, then Daniel Chin was like a grand, warm autumn sun. They were never the same. As the free clinic neared its end, everyone was chatting with the elderly and children. I saw Daniel surrounded by a group of kids and walked over to find him, helping them make bamboo joint dolls. Amid the chorus of little voices calling Brother Daniel, he bent his head, holding fresh green bamboo strips, his well-defined fingers deftly threading and tying knots. Then he handed them out one by one. This one is for little Yuan Yuan, this for Tong Tong, this for Dowdu. I casually took a few photos and was flipping through them when I suddenly heard Daniel's voice. Looking up, I saw him holding out a beautifully crafted bamboo joint doll toward me, joking, here, one for everyone. This is for little Shun Shung. Later, after several interactions, Daniel Chen and I became friends who could grab meals together. He would help me campaign for votes when I entered the most beautiful sunset photography contest. And during our clay sculpting sessions, he would solemnly mold various human organs, then raise a heart in his hand when the couple across from us finally shaped a pair of perfect ones, saying, "Look, this is a flawless heart." I set down the scattered limbs I was holding, offered an awkward smile to the exasperated couple opposite us, and pulled Daniel Chin away to change tables. He also took me to meet his lab mates. Pointing at the seniors who had shed their white coats, he introduced them to me one by one. Gazing at those familiar faces, I greeted them politely. I remember the gentle, elegant senior sister who transformed into a cool and fierce biker after taking off her white coat. And I recall the calm, steady senior brother who was actually a top-tier esports legend. As for my presence and Daniel Chen's introduction of me as my friend AVU, they looked at me with kind smiles and a no expression in their eyes. Honestly, they didn't say anything explicit, yet it felt like they'd said everything. My cheeks grew warm under their gaze, and Daniel stepped in front of me, pleading in a tone, "Senior bros and sis, please go easy, don't scare her off." They rested their chins in their hands, still smiling at me. Easy enough. Just call us senior bro and sis. And from now on, we're all family. Later on, I became friends with them too. We went script murder gaming together and attended university, joint music festivals. I immersed myself in this stable, lively life, almost forgetting that I had traveled back in time, until I met Julian Leong again, probably because all my attention and thoughts were on Daniel Chin during that period. I automatically tuned out my roommate's gossip and chats in the dorm. So when I saw Julian, it suddenly dawned on me that I hadn't heard his name in a long time. At an outdoor barbecue stall on a summer evening breeze, while Daniel Chin, his senior classmates, and I were playing Truth or Dare, I suddenly felt an intense gaze fixed upon me, instinctively turning to find its source. My eyes met Julian Liang's. He was sitting at another table with Sophie Xia and another couple. As if deliberately, Sophie held Julian's hand, talking incessantly, without caring if he listened, then laughed joyfully at something, while the guy across from her sat stiffly, with pursed lips. The atmosphere seemed harmonious, yet carried a subtle tension. Julian's gaze felt like pins on my back, until fortunately the guy opposite Sophie stood up abruptly and declared he'd lost his appetite. They were leaving, holding the goose leg Daniel handed me. I heard Sophie leaning against Julian while walking away with slight drunkenness. Julian, I like you the most. As they passed by us, my gaze briefly swept over them, and I noticed that Sophie Xia indeed seemed to adore him in both her actions and words. However, he didn't look happy at all. The answer to this puzzle soon revealed itself. Sophie Xia broke up with him. During our nightly gossip session, the roommate who joined the guitar club sighed with regret. Did you know? Sophie Xia and Julian Leong have broken up. My pen halted abruptly as I suddenly recalled a night in my past life when my roommate mentioned Sophie Xia breaking up with her boyfriend in the same way. Back then, she said Sophie Xia accused Julian Leong of not knowing how to love at all and couldn't bear to be with him any longer, insisting on the breakup, and soon after, she publicly announced a relationship with one of Julian's friends. But now, Julian had become everyone's idea of the perfect boyfriend, so I couldn't understand why they still ended up parting ways. My roommate's explanation was that Sophie Xia grew bored, feeling that Julian loved her like a pre-programmed robot. It was dull and uninteresting. Then, my roommate opened her social media feed to show us. Look, she's already announced her new relationship publicly, and it's with Julian Liang's friend. I stared at that post in my social media feed, speechless. It was the guy who looked displeased at the barbecue stand that night. Then I heard my roommate suddenly lower her voice and say mysteriously, the real reason is actually that Sophie Xia never liked Julian Leong. She was only with him to make her childhood crush jealous, to get a reaction out of him. Yes, that childhood crush is Julian's friend, her current boyfriend. So whether Julian knew how to love or not, Sophie never cared, because they were always going to break up in the end. And Julian, he thought he had the right answer, only to realize the question itself was wrong. Amid the sighs and murmurs, another roommate asked, so did Julian just agree to it? Didn't he try to win her back? He clearly seemed so into Sophie. No, I heard he accepted it very calmly and didn't say a word to try and stop her. I found it somewhat absurd and instinctively resisted accepting this reality because it made me feel that what was meant to happen would inevitably occur. This feeling peaked when I saw Julian Leong again a week later. I found a lost child separated from her family at a large downtown mall, took her to the broadcast station, and waited with her until her mother arrived. She was an exceptionally elegant and beautiful woman, dressed in an expensive navy blue cheapao. After taking the child's hand, she insisted on thanking me and invited me for tea at the tea house downstairs. Despite my repeated refusals, she persuaded me with the reasoning that she wouldn't feel right otherwise. As we rounded a carved wooden screen, I saw Julian Leong sitting at a square table, wearing a light gray sweater and holding a Celadon teacup. Distant memories instantly flooded back, though the timing was different. In my past life, my first encounter with Julian Leong had also begun with me finding this lost child. Only back then, it was Julian who came to the broadcast station to pick up the child. His cousin's daughter, who was visiting from abroad occasionally. Julian Liang's parents were both researchers, rarely by his side throughout the year. So growing up alone, he'd always been emotionally detached from family. During those 5 years we were together, I hardly ever saw any of his relatives. Thus, this cousin and her little daughter, whom I'd only met once, faded from my memory over time. But I never expected that, in this second chance, a similar situation would unfold, just with a slight twist. The girl's mother mentioned he was the cousin she'd arranged to meet, then turned to explain to Julian it was this young lady who helped find her. Her name is Ava Yu. At that, Julian set down his teacup and looked over, saying calmly, "Yes, I know her." I'm not sure how to describe what I felt in that moment. Upon learning that Ava and Julian were alumni, the girl's mother exclaimed with delight, "What a small world indeed." Then, with curiosity, she glanced between us and asked, "Physics and Chinese literature, how did you two meet?" The private room fell quiet. I withdrew my gaze from the swaying calamus across the table and said softly, "Not really. He was my classmate's boyfriend. We only met once." The next moment, Julian Liang added, "They've already broken up." "Oh, so he's an ex-boyfriend now." Perhaps sensing my lack of interest, the girl's mother stopped asking about me and turned her conversation to Julian Liang. I picked up a pastry and focused on amusing the little girl beside me, paying no mind to their chat, until just before we parted, I heard the girl's mother ask Julian meaningfully, "Coming back this time, I noticed you've changed quite a bit. Your temperament's completely restrained. Is it because of that girl you broke up with?" He shook his head gently. "No, she didn't like me, and I didn't like her either." "Oh, but you still seem rather sad." Julian Liang was silent for a few seconds, his voice slightly hoarse, because I realized too late that I might have missed someone who truly liked me. I didn't understand what he meant by that, nor did I wish to know. But after that, our encounters began to grow more frequent, trapped under the same roof by a heavy downpour, sitting at the same table in the cafeteria. Even the campus ginger cat I often fed suddenly darted to his feet one day. Too many coincidences are no longer coincidences, so I started going out less, avoiding the cafeteria, and stopped feeding that ginger cat. Some time later, Julian Liang stood in the library corridor I always passed through, asking with apparent confusion, "Ava Yu, are you avoiding me?" Yes, I was indeed avoiding him. After all, in this second chance, he and I have no connection anymore, nor do I want any. So I replied calmly, "And what gives you the right to stand here questioning me?" "My classmate's ex-boyfriend." He looked down at me for a long time, his face paling slightly, before finally stepping aside to let me pass. I thought, someone as proud as him probably wouldn't seek me out again, but his breakup, our meeting, and various events similar to my past life, whether occurring earlier or later, still stirred a deep unease within me. I began frequently dreaming of the car accident from my past life. In the dream, I returned to our second anniversary with Daniel Chen. He was driving me to dinner, and I sat in the passenger seat holding flowers, chattering about a travel show I'd recently watched and sharing my future travel plans. He listened quietly to my rambling, occasionally glancing at me with gentle eyes and responding, "All right, whatever you say." For some reason, I sensed something was off about him, but couldn't pinpoint what, so I brushed it aside and kept talking. Just as I was discussing how we should celebrate each anniversary in the future, a truck suddenly ran a red light and cut across the road. Truthfully, there weren't many cars or people on that road at the time. A timely brake would have prevented the accident, but the brakes failed. Without hesitation, Daniel Chun turned the steering wheel toward himself, giving me the only chance to survive. After the violent impact, I lost consciousness for a few seconds. When I reopened my eyes, I was in the blood-stained, pungent, smelling car interior, in too much pain to utter a single word. Through blurred vision, I saw a long shard of debris piercing Daniel Chen's chest as he weakly begged the gathering bystanders, save her first, please. I beg you, save her first." Later, they pulled me out through the shattered car window. The last thing I saw before losing consciousness was the vehicle exploding. The investigation results were soon released. Aside from the truck, whose driver ran a red light due to fatigue, Daniel Chen's car's braking system had been deliberately sabotaged. The perpetrator was a man burdened with millions in debt from online loans. Unable to repay, he developed a desire to take revenge on society and damaged the braking systems of nearly all cars in that area. Consequently, the car accident rate soared during that period, resulting in extremely high casualties. Lying in my hospital bed, I numbly scrolled through news on my phone and quietly listened to the condolences from Daniel Chen's senior colleagues who came to visit me. It wasn't until they mentioned that Daniel Chen had planned to propose that day that I understood why he had been acting strangely. The ring was found on Daniel Chen's body. It was beautiful, and I loved it dearly. During that time, everyone urged me to move forward and look ahead, but I couldn't comprehend it. If I moved on, what would become of Daniel Chen? Left behind here, I was jolted awake by the sound of an urgent alarm. Staring blankly at the ceiling, I realized my eyes were wet. I had been crying again. Every detail of that car accident was etched into my bones, including the criminal who tampered with the brake system. But there was nothing I could do now. After all, before sabotaging the brakes, he was just an ordinary person drowning in debt, and I dared not seek him out prematurely to avoid triggering other unforeseen changes. All I could do was keep the variables to a minimum and wait until the day he committed the crime. And during that waiting period, Daniel Chen and I got together. Even before that, I had vaguely sensed the signs that he was going to confess his feelings. It all started when a senior from the photography club asked me to pretend to be his girlfriend to fend off a girl who kept pestering him. In the elegant, quiet restaurant, the senior put his arm around me and said to the girl across the table, "I really do have a girlfriend. See, her name is Ava Yu. I'm not much of an actress, afraid I'd give it away if I spoke, so I just kept smiling and nodded along. The next moment, I accidentally spotted Daniel Chen and his friends sitting at another table behind the frosted partition. He must have seen the whole thing. When our eyes met, he abruptly looked down, ignoring his friends' questions, quietly eating his rice. That same night, I saw a post on his social media feed, a picture of a shattered heart model, captioned, "Heartbroken." The next day, I went to see him with his favorite green plum cake. In the corridor bathed in sunset light, he stood before me, looking utterly dejected, a far cry from his usual bright and spirited self. I watched him silently take a bite of the cake and asked him, "Is it sweet?" "No, it's bitter." I nodded in understanding, letting out a soft, "Oh," then changed the subject, mentioning a new roast duck place nearby and asking if he wanted to try it together. He silently stared at the ground for a moment, his voice a bit low. "If we go eat together, won't your boyfriend mind?" I feigned surprise and asked, You mean that senior from yesterday?" I was just helping him dodge unwanted attention. "How was my acting?" "Pretty convincing." "Huh? Even you were fooled." After a pause, noticing his eyes gradually brightening, I continued, "But even if I did have a boyfriend, he probably wouldn't mind me just having a meal with a friend. Then, would you mind having a boyfriend?" He suddenly cut in, looking at me with some nervousness. As our eyes met, I smiled faintly and said lightly, "Well, that depends on whether the green plum cake is sweet." I waited in line for 2 hours to buy it. "You know," he froze for a second, then stuffed the remaining half of the green plum cake into his mouth, mumbling, "Sweet, it's so sweet it's killing me." That evening, he posted again on his social media feed, a photo of my profile with the caption, "The rest of my life." That's how Daniel Chen and I ended up together. There were no grand romantic confessions like in novels or dramas, just two hearts already holding each other. After that, we spent an ordinary yet blissful time like any other campus couple, until the day before the date I'd marked on my calendar. An old, dated neighborhood, a 3 a.m. crime window, a sabotaged brake system. But that day was no longer our second anniversary, and his car wasn't parked there due to various changes. What I had to save were the others who remained. At first, I was nervous, worried about all sorts of mishaps, but reality unfolded surprisingly smoothly. Not wanting to get entangled in a criminal case and face endless questioning. I reported to the police that I'd lost a necklace worth 20,000 yuan in that area, last seen at 3:30 a.m. The police quickly pulled the surveillance footage and spotted a suspicious man repeatedly lingering near multiple vehicles, tools in hand. What followed was a natural progression of suspicion and investigation, none of which concerned me anymore. As for the necklace, I told the police the next day that I had found it in the trash. I also heard that multiple cars had their brakes sabotaged that night. The culprit was caught. The worries that had plagued me for so long seemed to finally come to an end here, but a sense of unease still lingered within me. This unease persisted until 2 weeks later, when Daniel Chen and I went to see a movie at the cinema. As I walked slowly through the crowd, a man with a scar on his right cheek brushed past me. A knife hidden in his sleeve caught my eye as he moved toward a pregnant woman. In a flash, my body moved faster than my thoughts. Before I knew it, I had stepped in to shield the woman from the blade. Lying on the ground, I finally realized what I had forgotten. That scarred man was a fugitive. In my previous life, he died in a car accident caused by brake failure while on the run. But in this life, the accident had been prevented. He had survived. Chaos erupted around us. Daniel Chen knelt beside me, saying something with such intensity that the veins at his temples bulged. But I could no longer hear anything. It felt as if I had been walking through a thick fog for an eternity until I arrived at the park near my childhood neighborhood. Back when I was 10, back then, due to my illness, I had to take hormone-laden medication year-round, which made me gain significant weight. The other children would often circle around me, taunting, "Fat pig, ugly freak, fat pig, ugly freak." I cover my ears, desperately trying to explain to them, "I'm not a fat pig. I'm sick, and I'll get better. I'm not a fat pig." No one listened to my pleas. They just laughed, watching me crouch on the ground, and shouted even more gleefully, until a youth appeared as if descended from the heavens. He coolly warned them that whoever dared say another word would be hung from a tree for the birds to poop on. After they scattered with screams, the youth crouched before me. I was too afraid to look up, and comforted me in a gentle, soothing voice. "Don't be afraid. I've chased them all away." I slowly lifted my head to look at his handsome face and whispered, "Brother, I'm not a fat pig. I'm sick." He smiled gently at me. I know, you're just sick, and you'll get better." After that day, every time I came to the park, I saw him jogging. No one else wanted to play with me, only he did. But he was too good looking, so much that I felt deeply insecure and sad. I couldn't help but ask him, "Brother, what if I never get better?" He ruffled my hair, hummed thoughtfully, and said, "Then I'll become a doctor. I'll cure you." From our first meeting to our parting, it was only 11 days. Those were the last words he left me with before his mother called out from not far away, "Jingji, Daniel Chen, come home for dinner." The next day, my dad was caught cheating, and my mom moved us away immediately. From then on, I never saw Daniel Chen again. When we met again, he had become a medical student, standing out in the crowd, handsome and radiant as ever, and my illness was already cured. Later, we unexpectedly reunited at the basketball court, got acquainted, understood each other, and ended up together. The person I had a crush on for nearly a decade had also fallen for me. Then, before I could even ask him if he remembered me, he died. Fortunately, this time, I saved him. If this is the price, then I am willing to bear it. I drifted back into the impenetrable thick fog, vaguely sensing someone speaking nearby, but unable to respond in any way. Faintly, I seemed to hear Daniel Chen's voice, sounding utterly helpless as he asked someone beside him, his voice broken and hoarse. "I studied medicine for so long, so why can't I save her? Professor, what do I do?" By the time I regained consciousness, the hospital room had fallen silent. Someone was sitting by the bed. With all my strength, I could only barely lift my eyelids halfway, vaguely making out his face. It looked like Daniel Chen, and also like Julian Liang. I struggled to distinguish for a long time, to no avail, until he spoke. If I hadn't traveled back in time, would the butterfly effect not have been triggered? causing you to get hurt. Or perhaps you also returned, which is why you saved that pregnant woman. After saying this, he paused and let out a self-mocking laugh. I never knew that in another timeline, you liked me because of him. Or was it because my time travel indirectly made you fall for him in this timeline? I suppose I'll never get an answer to this question, but Ava, I regret it. All along, I thought every problem could be solved through study, reasoning, and calculation, but it turns out loving someone isn't like that. It's unsolvable, just like how it seems I can no longer make you, who fell for him, love me again. I don't really like recalling those 5 years with Julian Leong, but a very small incident inexplicably surfaced in my mind. It was probably the winter of our 3rd year together. On my way home from work, while on the phone with him, I accidentally bumped into someone. After a startled cry, my phone slipped perfectly through the grate of a storm drain and fell into the sewer. In a state of extreme frustration, I spent the last of my cash on a taxi that drove me around all night. The next day, I learned Julian Leong had searched for me the entire night. I didn't understand why he did it, but a relationship that begins with impure intentions is doomed from the start. Now, saying anything more feels meaningless. I woke up on a perfectly ordinary evening. Opening my eyes, I saw Daniel Chin patiently wiping my fingers one by one. His head bowed. I turned my head slightly toward him and called out softly, "Daniel Chin." His movements froze abruptly. He didn't look up, the veins on the back of his hand standing out as he gripped the towel. After a moment of silence, he stood and strode out of the room. I stared at the white ceiling and counted silently in my head. When I reached 57, he walked back in. The corners of his eyes were red. After a full check, up confirmed I was fine. Daniel Chin took me to his place on the day I was discharged. From then on, he began carefully looking after me, devoting his days to my well-being. I said to him apologetically, "Sorry to trouble you so soon after we started dating." He let out an exasperated laugh, pinched my cheek, placed the bowl of soup before me, and feigned anger. "Then drink it quickly. Get that lost weight back ASAP." I frowned and shook my head, but I worked so hard to slim down. Saves me the trouble of dieting. He was utterly defeated by my response, scooped a spoonful of soup, and brought it to my lips, coaxing softly, "Come on, little Sheng, open up. Listen to Dr. Daniel. Healthy is the most beautiful." And so, between Daniel Chen's scolding and coaxing, I recovered from my injury. I saw Julian Leong again half a year later at a supermarket. While carrying a few oranges and looking for Daniel, I accidentally dropped one. It rolled and rolled until someone bent down, intercepted it, and picked it up. It was Julian Leong. He walked step by step toward me and placed the orange back into my arms. In the silent stare down, I sincerely said to him, "Julian, thank you." As soon as I finished speaking, Daniel Chen's voice suddenly called out. He was looking for me. Sheng. I quickly responded, "Coming," and brushed past Julian Leong just as he was about to speak. Just like fleeting encounters in the vast, boundless universe, we briefly crossed paths only to drift apart in the end. That evening, while tidying the study, I noticed a photo frame in the glass cabinet, a hand-drawn cartoon of a chubby little girl, with the word brother in a speech bubble above her head. I took the photo to Daniel Chen and asked him when he had recognized me. He smiled, a slight lift at the corner of his brow, and casually flipped the frame over. I froze. It was a photo of him, but the lens was focused on me passing by behind him. The date recorded was exactly the day we went hiking. So, the next day, he sat down beside me. From then on, our story began anew.